welcome back to the Geopolitical Pickle. As always, I'm your host, Ronan Wordsworth, joined by my co-host, Juan Free. How are you doing, Juan?
I'm doing pretty fine, Ronan. It's been, I want to go on holidays. I still haven't been able to go on holidays, but it's nice. Summer in Prague is, it's a beautiful one, to be fair.
And I've been enjoying the Olympics.
Ooh.
Australia finishing fourth on the medal table, which was
Which one was your favorite sports person in the Olympics? Because for me, I have to mention the Turkish guy. That you cannot have much more flow than that guy. Or you can
have the flow of Raygun, the Australian breakdancer, surely.
That was, oh my goodness.
I'm sure everybody's seen her wonderful performance.
I'm happy Spain won the Olympics. Spain won the gold medal in football. So we're having a really good year with that.
Australia apparently went our skateboarding powerhouse, if believe it or not.
But yes, and it's the one that won is super young, no?
Well, the lady, she's a girl, 14-year-old, and
14-year-old.
Yeah.
My goodness, what were you doing when you were 14 years old?
Not winning gold at the Olympics.
Definitely not winning gold. It's been an interesting one. We should talk about the Olympics one day.
We will. Anyway, to move on now to the topic of today, and I think it's going to be an interesting one. Today we're going to talk about Venezuela. Obviously, we just recently had the elections where they're highly disputed. We see Maduro is claiming that he won, the incumbent president, and I think it'll be fantastic to try and unpack what that means for the region, how different countries are reacting to the ongoing dynamic between the opposition and Maduro. And I think a good place to start, Juan, if you can just give us some background about who is Maduro, when did he come to power, and the lead up to the election, what was the situation like?
Sure. So Nicolás Maduro basically has been president of Venezuela since the former president Hugo Chavez died. Both of them, Chavez in the beginning and now Maduro, ran the PSUV, the Unified Socialist Party of Venezuela. Basically, they transformed the country. Chavez transformed the country from where he got it. You can have many opinions, whether for good or bad, but it is true that Venezuela, although it was pretty much a really rich country in the 70s, it was praised as one of the richest, if not one of the with the best prospects, if not the best prospect in Latin America. Given that at one point they found out that they had the largest oil reserves in the world, for example. It is true that then in the 80s and 90s, excessive economic crisis hit the country, and then there were a couple attempts of coup d'etat. Indeed, Chavez, for example, was involved in one of these, put into jail, and then this was in 1992, if I'm correct. And then in 1999, he ran for president, and he won the election, basically. Then ever since, there is doubts about the democratic part of the Venezuelan government. However, especially in the first years of the Chavez administration, he did manage to reduce a lot the levels of poverty in the country, because especially inequality was rampant. And what he did was basically siphoning the money that was generated from the oil exports into the lower classes of the society. This granted him a lot of popularity among the population almost until he died, basically. Even when he died, someone can argue that Chavez was still very popular. However, to siphon this money into the lower classes, what they did was nationalizing the largest oil company in Venezuela and basically unifying everything. They nationalized the company. What happened with that was that the company was mismanaged. There was a rampant corruption. There were the right investments that should have been put in place weren't put in place, and the production capacity of PDVSA, which is the national company of oils, basically lowered systematically throughout the years. Now Maduro comes into power in 2014. You already have Chavez dies from a cancer. You already have a decaying economy. Clearly, Maduro hasn't been able to relaunch it. It's been much more invested on putting money where he had to put the money. Again, you go back to the lower classes, or you go back to than people that you put in power, because Maduro has relied a lot on the military, for example, on the military power or on the security power. He's put a lot of people that are in the military in positions in PDVSA. The economic situation has been dire. At this point, there are around 8 million Venezuelans that are immigrants in neighboring countries. Most of them, they go to Colombia, but you also, obviously, there's a lot of them arriving to the United States, Mexico, Brazil, Spain. Now, the economic situation has not been good. The political situation has not been good either. There's been revolts in the streets. There were cases throughout the entire Maduro government since 2014 until now.
Yeah, I just want to touch on that because, 2018, there was the last national election prior to this one, and we saw Maduro again claim that he won in a disputed election against Juan Guaidó, who I know Spain ended up harboring, right, the opposition leader who was widely recognized by a lot of Western countries as a legitimate winner of the election in very similar circumstances to what we'll talk about soon about this current election. So what happened after that? Like, he was recognized by Western countries as the winner. How did it unfold following that?
Yeah, Guaidó came out from a time of the opposition not even participating in the elections. In 2017, the opposition decided not to participate in the election. Then Juan Guaidó claimed himself president of the country. Seeing with perspective may have been a big mistake because, yes, the West recognized him, but right now Juan Guaidó lives in Madrid, as far as I know, with no political relevance in Venezuela. Which is something that we can actually see now how it's unfolding in the present differently, because at the time in 2018, the United States, the European Union, and even many countries in Latin America, because it was a time where there was a tendency of right-wing / conservative governments in Latin America, they all tended to recognize Juan Guaidó in the moment. However, this didn't materialize in the country, and they had all these countries that gave the recognition that they had to retract. Maybe many times not officially, but as a matter of fact, Juan Guaidó is not recognized as the president of Venezuela by nobody right now, basically. So how it unfolded was that the opposition went back and running. They actually started running again. They engaged with the government in certain aspects. The government was a little bit more open and accessible to the opposition in entering in elections and so on, but this has always claimed to be basically controlled by the government. However, there's been international actors involved as mediators here. We can see that the opposition and the government have been supported for a long time from the same groups of people. The government has been supported usually from Cuba, from countries like Cuba, Nicaragua, and Russia, China, especially Cuba. Cuba is the biggest grantor of Venezuela, and Cuba receives a lot of energy from Venezuela, given this oil and so on. With Russia, there were allegations that the Wagner Group was protecting Maduro, although I am not certain that was confirmed.
It hasn't been confirmed. But just to go then, to this election right now, in the lead up to the election, the opposition leader Edmundo González was not the leader of the opposition until quite late in the race, right? Before that, there was a very popular opposition leader, Maria Corina Machado, who was banned from running, is my understanding. And this they were hoping would cause some fragmentation between different opposition groups, which didn't actually play out because she then endorsed Edmundo González.
Yes, basically there was an agreement that was also facilitated by countries like the United States that the opposition would run freely in the following elections. They started, especially after the Russian invasion of Ukraine, when the United States needs a little bit more.
Yeah, I want to come back to sanctions.
We can go there in a second, but the point was that before April 2024, between 2022 and 2023, there are meetings between opposition and government, and with the mediation of countries like the United States or the European Union even, or Cuba, in where the government agrees in allowing the opposition run with the candidate that they choose. Mm-hmm. Now, the problem was that when the run-up to the election starts coming, the polls show that the opposition is having a lot of track in the country, and that they may win. Polls were giving them over 60% of the vote. So in my opinion, in a moment of trying to curve down this, Maduro rejects these agreements that he's done in the past 2 years, and there's this campaign launched to discredit and basically ban opposition officials to run in the elections. One of them is Machado, Maria Corina Machado, who she's right now still supporting Edmundo González, as you're saying. Like, she's actually the face. Like, Edmundo González is the candidate, but she's the face. She's the one that
has the popularity.
Exactly. She's the one that goes into the demonstration, and is the one that gives the most fearful speech and everything. And so yeah, basically they banned her from running. They also banned her substitute from running, and then in the end they allowed this Edmundo González to be the candidate of the opposition.
And then the way the election unfolded, I would like just to point out that Venezuela has probably one of the best election systems or like anti-fraud systems in the world, because it's got multiple fail-safes against electoral fraud. However, my understanding is that then government forces were preventing the opposition from seeing the results and just declared themselves the winner. And they obviously control the electoral commission because they were all appointees of Maduro. So the opposition then has now tried to just ask for a count of the votes using the system, because I think there's a touch screen which you have to use your ID to go through.
There's a touch screen. You have a QR that
and then you get a receipt afterwards that you put in a box. So it's like a double, triple checked system.
It's arguably really respectable in many ways. However, it is true that for this system to be legitimized, the government has to show the results, and they have to show the results by table, by distribution, by district, whatever.
And so what's happened now?
What happened was that in the night of the elections, after some delay actually, because the National Commission of Elections allegedly was hacked, and apparently it is true that they received several million attempts of hacking, but they still haven't given the proof of this massive hack that they said. To be fair, I don't really doubt, like, it may have probably happened, that hacking.
However, that's why you have the paper. That's why you have the paper backups, right?
Exactly.
This is the point.
However, what happened was that at night, the president of the electoral committee goes out and says that Maduro has won the elections 51.2% to 44.02% of Edmundo González in the opposition, which is not just Edmundo González, understand this, and this is not just Maduro, it's a coalition of parties that are within this umbrella, and then 4.6% to others. Now, this starts being really weird because the polls before the election showed at least a victory for the opposition.
Quite a large victory as
well.
A large victory. 60 to 70%.
It was really like, yes.
Probably 70 plus.
Wherever were you going, the one that I trusted a little bit more, they were going like 63%, something like this. Like, still a big victory.
Yeah.
Maduro hadn't lost any single election except for in 2015 there was a parliamentary election and he lost the vote, and then he changed some of the Supreme Court so that they invalidated some of the candidacies and then did the trick. But in the last elections and in the previous ones, like, there was a solid there was a solid base of support, even with all this situation for the government. However, here there's like several things that come up and they are weird. Like, for example, when they give the elections, the results are exact to the 6th decimal. That is really weird on everything. Like, it's around once in 100 million times in chances that may happen. It's really like,
the rounding
even if you're exactly, then the argument is that, well, they didn't have the entire result, so they rounded up, and that's the results that they gave. It's like, yeah, but they rounded up to the 6th decimal. Like, I mean,
odd.
That is odd. Then again, the results were delayed. They didn't show the tally. And what the opposition started doing, what they started allegedly gathering the tallies from the local electoral offices, and what they found, allegedly, all of this is allegedly, because even the tallies that the opposition has shown, they've published around 25,000. The tallies that they show, they do show all of these things, all of these check-ins that we're talking about, and they show a big victory for the opposition. However, first of all, this is not accepted by the National Electoral Committee. This is also verifiable until a certain point, because it's also sources that they're giving you just from the opposition without an independent checking. So it is questionable. However, it looks like the result goes much closer to what the opposition is saying than what the government is saying.
So fast forward now. Okay, so we say most likely the opposition had a significant majority of votes, but the Electoral Commission, which is instated by Maduro, is invalidating that. Now we're in a situation where both sides have claimed victory, and how have different regions responded? So this time, has the West been more cautious than last time against Guaido? Who's recognized Maduro? Like, what is the breakdown of different dynamics?
So I think there's two things to take into account here. First of all, the energy crisis that is running through the West, basically. And second, the experience of supporting a president that was not a president, that never took the position, and that generated diplomatic problems later.
Okay, how about you tell me first again, then about the sanctions, and then we'll get to the response, because I think that is an interesting way to start looking at the world response. Because I know for a long time Venezuela's been under sanctions from the US for their national oil producing company.
Sure, yes. Sanctions basically started in 2015 under the Obama administrations. There were demonstrations in the country in 2014 that were violently repressed by the government. At that time, Obama decided to target individually government people that were responsible for the repression in these demonstrations. More or less, they stayed like this until Trump gets into the White House, and he starts restricting more and more operations and transactions that are coming in and out from Venezuela. At this point, the United States is one of the main consumers of Venezuelan oil, because the United States is one of the best consumers of oil
in the world.
Is the largest. So they were, obviously, if you have your country there, you consume because it's much closer. The transportation costs are much lower.
And I think Venezuelan oil is good quality oil as well, right?
It's really, Venezuela has the largest
quality
proven reserves of oil, and it's of one of the best qualities in the world.
Yeah.
Like, they literally have everything they need in that market, except for maybe the technical development that it's required. Then in 2019, Trump starts the sanctions against PDVSA, which is the national oil company. Mm-hmm. At this point, not just against PDVSA, but also the
officials
against officials of the regime, against Maduro himself, accusing him of drug trafficking, against his brother, and so on. And they sanction not just the companies in Venezuela, not just that American companies cannot do business with Venezuela, but they also sanction any company that would do business with the government of Venezuela.
And I think very interesting right now, if you look up OEC, which is the Organization of Economic Complexity statistics for Venezuela from 2019 onwards, the statistics make no sense, because they're
$700 million. No?
Yeah, their export quantity is minuscule, because all of this trade was then being done outside the normal global means, and so you can't really see how much trade there's being done besides looking at the production, right? Like the amount of oil that's being produced.
It is a problem. However, what I want to point is the effect of these sanctions. Mm-hmm. Because the government of Venezuela claims that the sanctions have put in really dire conditions the population in Venezuela, which is true. The fact that if your government exports depend 90% on the oil, and the government revenue depends 90% on the exports, you clearly have a lower in what the government can provide to the population. That is true. It is true that it's affected inflation. It is true that it's affected negatively the population in Venezuela.
I think there's an episode we should have in the future as well, specifically about sanctions, how they work, and whether they're effective or not, because there's a lot of
there's several
complexity
theories. One of the theories
is
punish the people that are doing this, but one of the other theories is you use the sanctions to lower the life standards of the population until they rebel against the government. Which is, in my opinion, what Trump was trying to do here. Yeah. Because clearly they affected directly the daily livelihood of the Venezuelan. Although the economic situation was not good, but it clearly got it. Let's say it's not the main reason why the economy is like that, but it was definitely an accelerator of why the economy is like that. So then we come all this situation, Venezuela is under these sanctions, and then Russia invades Ukraine. You have a massive a massive energy crisis. We need to diversify our resources. Venezuela is in search for money because they are in a massive crisis. So they have a meeting.
And they're basically on your doorstep if you're USA.
Exactly. Why are you gonna take your oil from, I don't know, Norway, when you can take it from Venezuela, where it's right there, and Norway is gonna sell it much more expensive.
I was gonna say you could get it nice and cheap from Venezuela.
Exactly, you get it nice and cheap, so it's good. Now, it was good for Venezuela too. They get into the conversations. Venezuela gets back on the market, and Chevron is the main company that from the United States starts dealing with PDVSA. But at this time, the United States needs Venezuela. Venezuela needs the United States, and they put a certain
caveats on these dealings, which one of which was, as you said, like the inclusivity of the opposition in government processes, and then having these elections be free and open for an opposition candidate to legitimately run.
Exactly. And now this develops fine until this point. The United States keeps on getting several 100,000 barrels a day of Venezuelan oil. But then, just before the elections, in April, the United States says that because, as you're saying, because they haven't actually gone forward with their agreements on allowing the opposition parties to run, they basically reinstall the sanctions. They are not as tough as they were during the Trump administration.
Because the need for oil is still there.
Exactly, the need for oil is still there. But there are still harsh sanctions on Venezuela. Venezuela is top 5 countries more sanctioned by the United States, and obviously the first one is Russia.
And then Iran, probably.
Russia, Iran, North Korea, and I think the following
Cuba
one is
Venezuela.
Syria and Venezuela. And Cuba. Well, of course, I always forget Cuba.
Okay.
Cuba, I give it for Cuba is always sanctioned.
Now, I think it's very interesting. That could you tell me who has recognized Maduro as the leader of Venezuela?
I don't know if you remember the list I just said, but Maduro has been recognized directly by Russia, China, Bolivia,
Honduras,
Nicaragua, Cuba, and North Korea, and Syria.
And Iran.
So basically, in my opinion, this has to do much more with Russia than it has to do with the rest of them. It's got to do much more with
global geopolitics.
Exactly. It's got to do with in what side of the table you want to be and in what side of the table you have to be in many occasions. Because, for example, yes, China has a policy of recognizing the elections, but I mean, the democratic record of China, is the democratic record of China.
But also, I mean, I guess just to point out that China obviously gets a lot of this oil very cheap because Venezuela needs a market that is not afraid of US sanctions for dealing with them, I guess, right? So,
exactly.
So they're happy to take oil from Venezuela.
And also China has invested a lot in this massive investment of the Silk and Road Initiative, although it's not based in Latin America, but Venezuela was one of the first signatories of BRI in Latin America, and in China has invested a lot of money in Venezuela. Yeah, but I wouldn't say it's as much politically as it is with the case for Russia. For example, with the case of Russia, it's politically. Now, these countries have recognized Maduro, but who has recognized the opposition? So, just after the elections happen, Antony Blinken comes out and says, well, we have
overwhelming evidence
that the opposition, that Edmundo González has won the elections. Now, several countries in Latin America took this as a de facto recognition of Edmundo González as president of Venezuela, as it happened with Juan Guaidó. And several countries got up on it, among them Peru and Argentina. Now, hours later, or 2 days later, I think, the United States...
Not Blinken, though.
No, it's not Blinken. I can't remember his name right now. But he came out and saying, we haven't recognized the opposition. We just say that there is ground for a doubt of the results that the government is providing. Which is basically also what countries like Chile or organizations like the European Union said. We have ground to sustain at least a doubt on the result of the election provided officially by the government. Therefore, we ask for the actual results, district by district, the distribution, everything. We will accept them if they are like this, but we need this because, clearly something is weird here.
And obviously these are not going to be provided anyway, so...
As of now, no. We are recording this 2 weeks after the results of the election. And as of now, there is no official talk about this in the government. They say that they've provided the results and that they will provide more. They said it last week, but still there is no real. It doesn't seem to be a real willing of the government to give the
partially, I guess, because they were burned last time with recognizing Guaido and then having him leave the country and, as you said, fade into political irrelevance, maybe, or like, is that the hesitation?
I mean, it's political irrelevance for
geopolitical reality.
For Venezuelans outside of Venezuela is still an important figure, but there are other important figures in the Venezuelan opposition outside. Many of them, if you want to check, are either in the United States or in Spain. It is interesting though which countries are being in the middle ground, and they are actually trying to push for negotiations. These countries are Mexico, Brazil, and Colombia. And it's interesting why the three of them. First of all, Brazil wants to be a stabilizer and growing power in the region, which it already is.
Which makes sense. I mean, it has a natural position as the largest South American company. It should be a regional.
Lula da Silva's idea since he became the president again is to reposition Brazil as this balancing power, not just in the world, but also in the region. It's a balancing central power, economic power, which is so far working. Then you have Mexico, which is ideologically, the government is ideologically leaning towards Maduro without necessarily having the authoritarian part that Maduro clearly has.
But also having to appease the US as well, I guess, because they have their own close association with the US. Not just
that, I would say even on the contrary, in Venezuela, I wrote an article some time ago in Venezuela. In Latin America, there are waves of left and right governments. So right now, we are in a wave of leftist governments in Latin America, all over Latin America, except for countries like Uruguay, Paraguay, Peru, and literally, El Salvador, which is like populist, but like not necessarily far right, but yeah, it's not like the neoliberalism that Milei wants in Argentina, for example, or the crazy situation in Peru. The thing is that these countries, these governments, they want to maintain, in my opinion, they want to maintain some stability in the region so that they can actually compete in the next elections, and they have to be looking forward for that, because in Latin America happens something that when all of the governments change, there are even new organizations, regional organizations created. There's a lot of policies that are just brought back. There's a lot of concentration, a little more into like fewer hands. So
that's interesting. It's kind of a uniquely Latin American thing where you have these waves of switching.
In the last 25 years, yes, it's pretty fascinating, because when Hugo Chavez was president of Venezuela, right after his first mandate, basically the entire Latin America had a leftist president. And Hugo Chavez put in place many regional organizations aimed to promote that regional integrity. Now, when the governments of Ecuador changed, the government of Brazil changed, Argentina, Chile, Argentina was later, but Chile and so on, they got together and they created another different organization that, for example, imposed sanctions on Venezuela or recognized Juan Guaidó. This organization right now doesn't exist. So it's interesting. And then you have the role of Colombia. Colombia is a country that is immersed in an extremely difficult peace process with guerrilla groups that are involved in
drug trafficking
in all sorts of trafficking, drug trafficking mainly.
Also,
and for Colombia, who's got a leftist president at the moment, is extremely crucial that the region is stable. Because as soon as the region is unstable, all these paramilitary groups that he's trying to bring together into a table and the ones that he cannot bring together into a table fight, but the aim is not to fight anyone, rather bring people onto a table and achieve this peace, they can seek shelter in Venezuela. And they were seeking shelter in Venezuela. They were proven to be seeking shelter in Venezuela. But because the ideological position of both governments was closer now, since Gustavo Petro became president of Colombia, the situation in that sense had been a little bit more helpful from the Venezuelan side. Yes. If you have a problematic, unstable Venezuela and therefore region, because an unstable Venezuela means
We've already seen 8 million.
Another couple million migrants entering Colombia, for example. Well, this is a problem for Colombia.
And of course, if these people are desperate, then
exactly
they're going to poor areas of Colombia and
exactly
can destabilize. Last thing now before we wrap up, I just want to ask you, how do you see the situation evolving from here? I mean, it's obviously difficult to call because we see both sides still claiming legitimacy and the whole process devolving into some sort of chaos within the country. Do you think there's any reason to be optimistic, or what's your outlook?
I mean, it depends on what you consider optimistic in this sense. For me, optimistic in this sense is that the election result, whatever it is respected, and that the country remains stable. Now, this I enter with my thoughts, but like the opposition in Venezuela, like what people are also scared is that they may sell the national resources to. The level of inequality can be really bad. With the current government, the level of poverty is really bad. So what I fear is that regardless of who comes into the power, if they don't manage their resources properly, and there is not a proper redistribution of this massive wealth that Venezuela has by default, the situation for the average Venezuelan is not going to get better with neither of them. Now, regarding the geopolitical aspect of it and regarding the stability aspect of it, in my opinion, right now, Venezuela is needed. Venezuela is needed for the United States. Venezuela is needed for the countries around. So the government in Venezuela is right now in a position where internationally, I don't think they will be challenged as bad as they were, for example, in 2019. I don't think they will be challenged at that point because we need oil, period. Now, if there's any change happening, it will happen from inside. If there is an actual substantial ground for revolt, stable ground for revolt, then
that's where we might see the change.
It may trigger a change in, for example, parts of the military. It may trigger a change in regional governors, stuff like this, that may see Maduro as the losing horse. And then you may have a change.
This big swing.
Exactly. But for now, at least internationally, I don't think that there will be any sort of massive intervention. Let's see when Donald Trump gets into the White House, or if he does get into the White House. But I don't think with Kamala Harris, for example, you will have much of a difference.
Yeah. Well, fantastic. I think it's fascinating what's happening. I'll be tracking it very much with interest to see how it evolves. Thank you, everyone, for listening. Just before we go, we've got a couple of quick announcements, exciting news to bring you about more geopolitical pickle content. I know we teased a while ago an upcoming series that we have about disinformation in Africa, which is still on the way. It's still in development, and hopefully we can bring that to you at the end of summer. And then secondly, we are very pleased to announce that keep tuned, because we're going to have a bi-weekly newsletter which should be released later this year, and we'll start getting subscription links for that, so you can sign up. Obviously, it'll be free, delivered to your inbox every 2 weeks, covering geopolitics of the great powers, both current and basically some background information which might help you analyze the world going forward. So very excited to be bringing you that in the coming weeks and months.
Yeah, shortly we will announce it officially, and we will give you the links for you to sign up and advance. Everything. And we hope that you like it. We always like your opinions. We always like for example, if you thought that Ronan pronounced the Spanish names well today, because it's usually me who I struggle with every name, but maybe today Ronan had a part in that. But we like your comments, we like your feedback, so this will also make us be a little bit closer to you, and hopefully you enjoy it as much as we will.
So again, thanks for listening, and we'll catch you next time on the Geopolitical Pickle.
Ciao, ciao.
The Geopolitical Pickle is created by Ronan Wordsworth and Juan Francisco Muñoz. Follow us on Instagram at The Geopolitical Pickle or Twitter at The Geopickle for more content, and follow us on every podcast platform.